Well, thanks, Eric, for inviting me back. Man, I really think you've got a great series going. I'm hoping I can chime into some more of the future sessions of this webinar. And thanks everyone who has come online to join us today. This is going to be a report and a talk about something kind of specific, which is prison-based family literacy programs. But I'm very hopeful that we can make connections to lots of other areas of adult learning and literacy, parenting and literacy in general, and distance learning, transition programs. A lot of what this talk is going to be about touches on, I think, some common ground across us all. So would be really helpful at this point is, and Eric, did you have a chance to create the poll?
Yes, I'll launch it right now. Okay.
All right, so the first polling question is just to get a sense of who you guys are out there and what areas, if any, in adult learning or in adult literacy or in ESL or whatever that you're working. So if you could take a minute to respond to the poll, that would be awesome, and then we will regroup.
We're nearing the halfway point of voting. 57% so far correctional ed, about 13 vocational, 38 ABE, 63% transition and college readiness. Right, we've got this overlap because people are involved in more than one thing. We've got 57% of the people have voted, 64%. So I'm going to leave it open for just another few seconds. It's not like Chicago. We want you to vote early and often. But...
Eric, should I be able to see this, or are you just reading those?
No, I'm reading these.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't doing something.
All right, so I'm gonna close the poll now. Okay. So the results are 40% correctional ed, 10% vocational ed, 30% ABE, high school equivalency, and then 70% transitions, college readiness, and developmental education, and no ESOL.
Okay, wow, okay, great. Well, thanks everyone. And if there's others out there that don't fit into any of these, don't despair, you're important too. So, and we'll try to make those connections as we go through. Okay, so I think I'm in control of the slides, and can I go forward now?
Yep.
Okay, so you'll notice periodically as we go through the presentation that there'll be pictures up. These are pictures of a project that I've been fortunate to be associated with called Hope House. Basically, when I was working for the federal prison systems, I just simply got the door opened. The program is the brainchild of Carol Fenley, who's a social activist in Washington, D.C. She and Mitch Snyder did a whole bunch of hunger strikes back in the 70s that resulted in the Center for Creative Nonviolence, which was the largest homeless shelter in D.C. And then, and Carol lived in the homeless shelter with, with her children for about 16 or 17 years. And while she was there, many of the children that came through and lived parts of their lives there ended up, I guess is no surprise, perhaps, in the prison system. When the D.C. prisons were turned over to the federal, when Lorton basically was turned over to the federal prison, families were really caught in that policy shift, because no longer could families just drive down the road to Lorton, Virginia to visit their family members. So Carol started this Hope House project, which was intended to keep families connected. And so the pictures are meant to just sort of be a chance to just sort of enjoy a little visual. There's nothing too significant. can you see my little arrow circling? Is that something you can see? Like when, I don't know if you, like
Yes,
I'm using
yeah.
my cursor. Okay, so this is me scratching my forehead at one of the summer camps. Anyway, the pictures are, this is a picture of a summer camp where the children come in and spend a week with their fathers, and they make these very large murals over the course of a week. And of course, in the evening, the kids go back and do summer camp stuff. The fathers stay in prison. So these images really, if they have any real significance, they're meant to just be a sort of a juxtaposition to what I see as the general attitude towards parenting in terms of policy and in terms of research, and probably, but I don't know for sure, in terms of a lot of programs that are geared towards prisoners. So let's see now. I'm hoping to. Here we go. So I want to start with a few really weird questions, and I'm hoping that you'll either signal by raising your hand or will write something in the chat room. But these are kind of broad questions. One is, what do you think is the reason for reentry? Why is reentry necessary in your mind? The second is even weirder, maybe. What is it prisoners are re-entering? And then thirdly, when does re-entry happen? You don't have to answer all three, and you don't have to answer in order, but if you have thoughts about those, please take a minute and raise your hand or write something down for us.
Right. So as Bill said, I can either unmute you, raise your hand, and I can unmute you, or you can use that question area to type something up. Diane, I see that you have your hand up. Maybe you can type a question about what question you had. Hi, Diane. Did you want to respond to one of these questions? No? Okay. It's always interesting, Bill, when you're giving wait time in a classroom, right? So you ask a question and you give wait time and you wait some more for students to formulate their answers and to really think about it, and no one really thinks twice about it. But on a webinar, when people are thinking and getting ready to type, it always is a bit stranger.
As long as I haven't lost everyone, they all went home already.
No.
That would be very hurtful.
So if you type something up, then I can share it with Bill, or I can unmute you.
And we can keep going. And
okay. Here's our first. So Babette says, reentry is necessary for those returning to communities and needing transition for successful return. It happens at the hit of the gavel.
Huh. Could Babette explain what she means by the hit of the gavel? That's a really interesting term.
Babette, I'm going to unmute you. Babette, do you want to explain that a little bit more? Or maybe you don't have a microphone? Okay. Some people end up, in listen-only mode, and so they can't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to guess that the hit of the gavel means that there's a certain arbitrariness about when a judge says you're ready to be released, maybe, or that at least all the decision making is taken away from the prisoner. Am I sort of getting that idea right? That it occurs in ways that are decided by others as opposed to family members.
Okay. Nathaniel's chimed in, and Nathaniel says they are re-entering the world of choices. They must be independent to make good choices. Re-entry should start at the time of incarceration through release and thereafter.
Okay, yay. Love that answer.
Okay. And to Babette, to clarify, said that she doesn't have a microphone, but the hit of the gavel is when the court proceedings begin. So I think in some ways echoing what Nathaniel was just saying, that once the process starts, that the reentry process should be also starting.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I was way off, but both of you are, yeah.
Okay, and
Making,
Drew says, I think reentry is necessary because prisoners have a challenging transition to make, and it's likely they are facing even more challenging circumstances than when they went in. Reentry program should happen at sentencing.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. I think that sort of answers some of all
Okay.
three of those questions, I think, Bill.
Yeah. Okay. This is awesome, and I think that we are on the same page about when reentry should begin in terms of that. And so now I'm going to sort of proceed to let's just go forward, and we're going to come back to these ideas about how policy and even researchers think about reentry and when it starts. Um, let's see. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So uh, for those who are in correctional education, and maybe for everyone, these are not new statistics, and they're contested. So a lot has to do with how people make definitions. But in sort of for the last, since probably the 18, I'm sorry, it feels like the 18th, the 1990s at least, recidivism rates have been somewhere around 2/3 of all prisoners end up back in prison. That might be changing now because of the economic pressures to more than sort of the ethical pressures to do something else with nonviolent criminals and to have more just drug laws. So, but at any rate, a large percentage of prisoners come back to prison. Clearly, it's an indictment of the prison system's inability to prepare, to achieve its own mission, which is to prepare folks for release. So if we think about why we need reentry, and notice the word family reentry at the top of this slide, it's even though it's so obvious when what you guys are saying is so true that all the much of the ability to make your own choices and to think for yourself have been taken away in prison, and there's a whole lot of decompression and gearing up that has to happen. But we step back and think, just pretend as if like we are looking at this phenomenon of reentry kind of with completely like foreign eyes. We can also say that reentry, a formal structure for helping people re-enter the world is needed because they've been separated. And they've been separated both in time, in terms of sentence length, and space, in terms of miles from home. So clearly that's a super obvious reason why we then need to help them re-enter to transcend that gap. But also there's attitudinal gaps. And I think that it's probably not an overstatement to say that that the mood in the U.S. Popular culture and certainly in the political discourse is that prisoners are not members of society. They've lost the right to be, to vote. They can earn the right for re-membership, but currently they are not members. So those first three bullets are just more obvious things about why reentry is necessary. And then the family aspect of reentry is the piece of it that I'm particularly interested in now, because most reentry work tends to be in areas of vocational and educational areas, which is, of course, essential, substance abuse, and things like housing. But there's very little, at least that I'm aware of, and if you all have good connections here, we really want to share them, clear guidance and policies on the re-entry into families. And yet, we know that there's at least 2 million children right now in the United States who have lost a parent or both parents to prison. So this re-entry issue is critical from everybody's perspective. Picture. Here's an example of the Bureau of Prisons, where I worked for 25 years, which I liked some aspects of their policy. But you can see that in their mission statement, they'll say, and I'm just going to read the red part, that through the programs, inmates are well prepared for a productive and crime-free return. So even you can see in the Bureau's policy the idea of is that they can return to society. They are not members of society, but they may, if they develop skill sets, return to society and to earn back their membership. My friend Kevin Warner from Ireland laments over a shift in the Irish policy at the bottom of this page, where he says, well, once official policy in Ireland referred to prisoners as valued members of society. And remember that the Irish prison narrative includes many of their folk heroes in terms of the liberation movements in Ireland. So they have a very different, they have a very different idea in some ways about who prisoners are. But Kevin's picking up on this idea that while once Irish policies referred to prisoners as valued members of society, can you imagine? The current mission statement speaks of encouraging some prisoners to become members. And Kevin sees this as this sort of creeping dehumanization, as he would say, of what had been a very humanist approach. Feel free to jump in at any time. I'm going to pause for another poll in a few minutes, but we can certainly take questions at any point.
Well, Bill, I think I wanted to say something, Bill, at the beginning, which is I think, you said, well, some of these things are obvious, but I'm not sure that they're obvious to everybody, right? And I think that often we think of things as common sense or that there's no other alternative, right?
Yeah.
So then when we talk about prisons or we talk about prisoners, we talk about reentry, we assume that it just means one thing and that there's no other models out there, that the model that we have is the only way to do it, right? And so we don't really think about what the implications are of other ways of thinking about this.
Yes, absolutely, Eric. Thank you. Exactly. And so that's part of what this is about, is to question those super basic assumptions that we all have. I certainly have and have had for most of my life. So thank you for adding that. So if it's true that we have, millions of families separated by prison, and that we seem to have a good sense that children need their parents, rightly or wrongly, then why is there so little on family reentry? And the second part of that is, why is it that the common sense, as Eric says, about reentry is increasingly locating it in the future? So that's the point I want to move to now. Every one of you that responded said reentry should start from the moment the hit of the gavel, and I absolutely agree with that. As Nell Bernstein wrote a really beautiful book on the trauma that children experience the second that their parents are removed from the house, usually in a very dramatic and traumatic way. And yet, why is it that our family reentry and all reentry is shifting towards some point in the future? So, again, not to bury you with text, but the top quote is a good quote, in my opinion. This is the prison policy statement on reentry, and the Bureau, to this day, the Bureau still says that preparation for release begins at the initial commitment. We could say at the hit of the gavel, and continues throughout incarceration. But what's been really significant since some of you will be aware of this, that there's been a large federal grant called the Second Chance Act that has put a pretty sizable amount of money into projects that help with prisoner reentry into society. And that language in those grants is in stark contrast. So that this quote here from the National Institute of Justice, and at the bottom of just the red part, the Second Chance Acts effectively supporting offender reentry, which is defined as the transition from life in jail or prison to life in the community. So we can say, well, that's just words, and it's not really. We shouldn't make too much out of that. Yet we'll see how, again, these discourses affect the very common sense of so many people inside and outside the profession of corrections. Um, so I think this is another poll question, um, Eric, which we don't have to use, but if you think it would be useful, I'd like to ask if folks, I want to talk a little bit about family literacy, and I'll explain why in a minute, but yeah, obviously we're touching on that now. Could
I
we?
think I think rather than doing the individual polls, Bill, maybe
Yeah.
people can use that question feature to kind of combine those. If you have experience with
Okay.
family literacy and experience with parenting programs, either or.
Yeah. So yeah. So if you have experience with family literacy, I'd love to hear from you if you have if you feel inclined, and or parenting. And there's a fine line between the two. Some family literacy programs are structured in such a way that there's an actual parenting subcomponent within it. I'm trying to use these terms very generically. That is to say, I'm sensing that almost all of you out there are working right now, at least a little bit, you're working with adults. What I'm not sure of is whether you have also any connections with working with children or with children through the adults that you have in your programs.
Okay, so far the folks that have chimed in, Nathaniel says he does not. Susie says very little.
Uh-huh.
So maybe some of your, it is something that people have limited experience with. Other folks, do you want to kind of let us know about your experience with family literacy or parenting programs? And maybe if you do have experience, then we could unmute you and you could describe what the curriculum looks like.
Yeah. And one of the things while
No,
you're
Bill, I'm just going to go ahead and launch the poll, Bill, I guess.
oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, I'll just launch the poll. It'll
Okay.
take 2 seconds, and that way everybody can just click yes or no.
Alrighty.
It's nearly unanimously no.
Okay.
We're
Well,
not quite at the halfway point, but now we're above the halfway point, and it's unanimously no.
okay.
So I don't think I have to run the second one about the parenting programs necessarily.
That's fine. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to close the
Well,
poll.
I don't know. Like, I mean, you could, but anyway, it's all right. What I'd like to think about in this third question on the slide, how would you describe the curriculum? Here, especially what I'm really interested in, and maybe this was not a poll question, this is just something that, if you could, I'd love to hear you sort of, chat or raise your hand and talk about, which is, could you, if we talked about our curricula in terms of either situated, meaning where our learners' personal and individual life experiences are part of the curriculum. For example, they might be writing like an autobiography, or they might be writing a story, or they might be reflecting on an experience that happened in their lives, or they may be pulling vocabulary words from from something in their personal life, like they might want to learn how to spell other children's names so they can write letters, or any of that. Like, if we could make a false division between sort of personalized curriculum and a more sort of official curriculum, how would you categorize your program, whatever it is, whether it's literacy or it's vocational training or whatever? And don't you may say that's just a false separation. It's a bit of both. But could you take a minute and let me know if you have a sense of whether your curriculum tends to be very sort of situated and personal, or official and sort of like the curriculum is set and is you follow the sort of set curriculum.
And while people are thinking about that, I can share that Babette shares that her experience with family literacy is in programs offered through their facility. So reading with a child, parenting classes, and nutrition classes facilitated through the volunteer program. So, in some ways that's answering some of your question, that it's much
Yeah.
more, depending on what the curriculum looks like, thinking about nutrition or parenting or reading with a child, that's certainly very much more of a personal thing. Drew shares, I don't have direct experience, but a partner uses my group's web-based learning platform to support family literacy and connections to children's elementary school programs. I
Hmm.
believe the curriculum focuses on giving parents the skills to feel like they're capable of engaging in the child's learning.
Hmm.
Okay, so
Great.
very, very traditional sort of family literacy goal, but in
Yeah.
a different context.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Adam, hey Adam, shares, jail where I work has parenting programs that our students attend through the offender aid and restoration, but he's not sure of the curriculum.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Hi,
And
Adam.
and Shannon notes that in the prisons she works in, most of the inmates in the class come from families that cannot read or write. So certainly that's also a traditional family literacy concern of the whole family literacy, the literacy of
Yeah.
everybody in the family.
Okay. Good. Good. So those are nice answers. I'm glad you're making these connections beyond just family literacy, formal family literacy, but these broad curricular questions. Because I think part of this report that I'm doing now, it has implications for how messy reentry can be if it's personalized. But yet I'm going to argue that to some degree that's something that we have to deal with as from broad policies. Um, is it okay to move forward
Sure,
now?
I think so. Yep.
Okay, yeah. All right, so now we want to come back to this idea of where reentry is located. And my argument and what I've been finding is, in general, not just are the policies since Second Chance Act shifted towards locating reentry in the future, but our very researchers that are studying this issue of keeping families connected, or parents and children in the whole context, are sort of buying into what Eric said, the common sense that reentry has to wait. And if it's true that reentry happens in the future, then that means, if we think of family reentry, that means you are not a family member now. Your membership, not just in society, but your membership in your family, your child's membership in, if you're the child of an incarcerated parent, the child's membership with that parent is also severed. So the language is important for the implications. And then when even like the people studying the program sort of buy into the futurity, and I sort of associate futurity, that is to say, we might have parenting programs in our prisons, but they're all sort of generic. They don't invite, I'm not blaming teachers at all. It's the whole structure. But when the structure talks about skills in generic ways, like here's how you discipline a child, or here's when children learn to speak, here are the milestones of development. Those are all wonderful, they're really critical. But if the individual students in that classroom cannot voice what they're experiencing existentially as a separated mother, as a separated father, we're buying into that sort of, well, this is all for when you get out. And so I'm going to show you real quickly some examples from my looking at the literature, research literature about this. So here's a quote from Tompkins et al. Reentry is the system overseeing the release of prisoners. Again, you see how that is. It's when you get out. It's the system that happens as you're leaving. Clark, O'Brien et al. Say, when they do entertain the idea that you could have a present parenting program in the present time, they say the prison context overwhelms responsible or active fathering. And let's face it, it sure does. It sure does in many, many cases. And the red quote in the bottom, Arditi et al., incarceration represents a dormant period. And this is a perfect metaphor for, I think, the way policies shape the way many folks, not even in prisons, but in the public and even in the research community, sort of think about this, that if you are incarcerated, you are your parenting has gone into a period of dormancy. This is a rather busy slide, but just to say that there are ways that this common sense seeps into every aspect of research. For example, the data collection methods for a study that Meeks did, the very survey questions that he asked were like, when you get out, what do you think it's going to be like trying to renegotiate a relationship with your children? You can see by the very questions that the unconscious assumption, the fact is that this is something that has to wait. And Clark, in their sample, only sampled people that were on the way out. That is to say, as they were getting ready to leave, they were basically repeating that same sort of narrative. Now that you're getting out and you're going to re-enter your families and your communities, yada, yada, yada. And this sense of what I think of as like just uncontested despair about family relationships. The bottom, I'm just going to hit the red print. There's just plenty of studies to reinforce this idea of it has to wait. And there are studies of female prisoners, male prisoners, youthful prisoners, children of prisoners, caregivers, and former prisoners, and they all have this. There's a lot of, if you look just a little bit, you'll see that this sort of futurity and hopelessness is repeated over and over again. But there are other studies, but there are a few other studies that sort of challenge that. One research team, Ardetti and Parkman, at least they made that assumption explicit, and they said our pre-understanding of young men's reentry experience is characterized by social exclusion. So they go into it assuming that membership has been severed, and so they're at least transparent about that, whereas in many cases it's this unconscious thing. By the way, this picture is, I will explain just a little bit. This is a girl who, when she met her father again for the first time, she was 9 years old. You have to be 9 to go to the Hope House summer camp. And behind her is the mural that she and her father created. And the mural, they didn't know what to do. They felt awkward. They hadn't been in contact with each other. They had totally been out of touch for years. And the artist who runs the artwork basically said to them, well, what do you want to do? When they were like completely panicking and feeling scared and everything. And so then I think the daughter said, well, or I think the artist said, well, what do you remember about your father? And she said, well, I remember when I was, like 5 years old, and we went swimming, and we went to the movies, and it was really cool. So they decided that they would bring back that memory, sort of revivify that memory. So they did, and you can't tell, but behind them is a swimming pool with the daughter and the father sort of remembering, and I mean that two ways, like remembering the past and remembering each other in the present, that experience. Okay, anyway, so as Eric also said, if we can do, think outside the sort of the common sense, if we can break out of it. Sometimes one way to do that is to see how other countries think about this stuff. And I spent a little bit of time with some of the Scandinavian prison education folks, and it helps me so much to sort of get these fresh perspectives. So, for example, in Sweden they have policies, the explicit policies. They're based on the UN rights of the child. That when children's need to have a parent home for birthdays, they have to consider that in the programming and the sentencing of the parent. That there's a website for children, and that's wonderful. And I know that many prisons do that here too. But there's also, in the last bullet, every prison has a specially trained children's ombudsman whose role is to advocate when there's decisions made, whether it's disciplinary decisions or programmatic decisions. They're there to advocate for the children on the outside. You just see, you can read between the lines to see how the severing of the parent and the child is apparently not nearly as final in Sweden. Um, in Finland, similarly, the child has a right. Again, they go back. They take the UN rights of the child very seriously, and they use that to get leverage in terms of prison policy, which is quite astonishing. The child has the right to regular contact with both its parents, and the prison is obligated to support the imprisoned parent in the performance of his or her childbearing responsibilities. So again, it's good. It's good to step out and see sometimes how these things are done. I guess I forget this one because none of you are working with kids. But I wanted to say that yeah, let's move on if you don't mind, because we're almost to the end, and I'd really like to open it up to conversation.
Hang on, before you move on, Bill. I just wanted
Okay.
to add. Adam
Yeah.
had chimed in. I think he mentioned deportation. And
Mm.
deportation adding another layer of reentry and family separation for students, adult students learning ESL. So I think
Yes.
the issues that you're talking about here, while
Yeah.
coming out of the literature on reentry and prisons, certainly are throughout the adult learning system as a whole and the justice system as a whole. And there's lots and lots of separations, geographic and temporal separations happening, not just in
Yes.
prisons as well.
Absolutely. And thanks, Adam. Absolutely. And these are the kind of connections I'm hoping that this has a larger, message that way. And I think it could probably apply to military personnel who are deployed 2 or 3 times, and or just once. But right. So these are really um, not unique to prison at all. So thank you. It's a great connection. Um, but here's an interesting thing. So because Hope House does have an opportunity to talk to not only we have I think Babette was talking about like this visiting room programs where they read books to the children and all. So Hope House it has the summer camp, but it also has like a reading is fundamental kind of style program where every other month the fathers read books and send them home, and they have help with other visits, etc. And these have a cumulative effect of, of, of breaking through dormancy. But even Hope House fathers go through periods of being dormant and being awake, for lack of a better word. And what I beginning to find is these are not simple things. They're not simply good or bad. So I'm not sure if you can read this. I'll try to do this simple, and I'll use my little cursor here to see if it can help. So with one Hope House father, when he was talking about being asleep or being disconnected or separated from the community, that there was a plus and minus to that. The plus was you don't have to think about the harm you did to others. You don't have to think about time passing you by and people, your brother setting up a successful barbershop and you being the sort of the failure in the family and all of the agony of your sort of like time passing away, the world passing you by. You don't have to think about that when you're just going through the motions day by day, living within the moment inside prison. But of course, the risks going down this column of being dormant are you lose your past, you lose your future. And Susan Rosenberg talks about her experiences in solitary confinement with this radical separation being she forgot like what her mother's face looked like. She forgot what her favorite smells smelled like. She forgot what her favorite foods tasted like. So this dormancy is a way of avoiding pain. It's also, though, sort of a radical way of sort of losing your sense of who you are, your past and your future. But on the other hand, if you are awake to the presence of your membership in your family, because after all, who can tell another person you're no longer a member of your family? It's not something that's sort of, it isn't something that's legislated. It's something that's sort of embodied in this, all these structures. So if you dare to stay present, if you dare to keep your children and your loved ones present, even if they're separated through time and space, the good thing is, and this we heard some of these descriptions from this prisoner that we're calling Timothy, is it gave him something to live for. It gave him back his past, his identity, a sense of of purpose for going forward, to reunite. It gave him a chance to reconcile with the caregiver, because by sending books home to his daughter, the caregiver, who was like really pissed off at him, began to see that, wow, you know, he's not manipulating this. He's not trying to get anything out of it. He's just doing it freely for her, etc. So there is enormous potential good that can come from the presence of parenting while you're in prison, despite a lot of the theories that, you know, it can't be done. It can. It comes at enormous cost, but it can be profoundly, in my opinion, transformative. On the other hand, with this awakening, all the guilt, all the doubt, all of the agonizing and reliving the past is on the genie's out of the bottle, and so it comes. So when we think about presence in our programs, we have to. It's messy, and it takes, you know, it takes resources and probably some staff development to do those kinds of things. So anyway, so some of the broad implications for a prison reentry. One is that I think it may be fair to say fathers behave as if they're dormant in all those studies, and mothers and children too. But they don't have to be dormant, and probably they aren't in their heart of hearts. They probably have dreams, and they probably have flashbacks and all those associations. Reentry is not preparation for the future. It's only meaningful in the present, and that's at least in terms of family reentry. Life is too short. Children are growing up. It's a bad thought to think that it has to be located, family reentry, in the future. But the last point is that looking up or being awake can come with a cost. So, all right. So I think we've we're not really going to have a chance to talk about these things, except that Adam did make that connection with other contexts, such as deportees and undocumented families when they're separated. Clearly, profoundly similar and yet very different, but we need to be thinking about, is that a hopeless situation, or what can be done to be present, to keep those families connected in the present there. Let me just real fast go through some final points. I'm just going to say there's a slide here with some resources for any of you who are interested. One's a link to Hope House itself. There are tons of parenting and family literacy resources out there. This is just a small sample. The one on the California Bill of Rights for children of incarcerated parents is actually based on a project out of San Francisco, which is, from what I can tell, is the closest parallel to the Scandinavian policies that we have in this country. And even here, even though it's really modest, the basic of the Bill of Rights, which was passed by the state Senate, it basically just says, corrections personnel are encouraged to share this Bill of Rights and to talk about it. But there's not a terrible amount of teeth in it. Still, it's a really important step in the right direction. And the last thing I'd like to say is we have a new journal called the Journal of Prison Education and Reentry. There's a link here. And there's two streams. There's a research stream and there's a practitioner stream. The practitioner stream is we are looking for folks, and not just in prisons, but working in alternative settings, who can tell their stories and can share them with with folks around the world. We're really excited about the journal. We're hoping to launch our initial issue this summer, and if you would like to talk to me and to see if your ideas for this would be would make sense for the journal, I'd be so happy to do it. But just know that there's a whole strand of this journal specifically for practitioners to be able to talk to other practitioners. And they're small. They're like 2,500 words, which is really a rather small piece. They don't have to be voluminous, and you can do more. You can do multiple. So, and with that, I will stop and maybe just open it up.
I think, Bill, in order to do that, why don't you go back a couple slides to that implication for literacy practitioners, just because
Okay.
I think this
Okay.
may give people some sense of, some of the things you might want to say. So as you're saying, what are the implications for this in non-prison contexts? How is it that family literacy programs can help families rewrite their worlds, right? If we're thinking about this long-standing connection between reading the world and writing the world, and
Yeah.
and then also thinking about just family literacy providing structures to nourish existential space and time. So, so you're not just going through the motions, but how can you redefine the time and the space that you're living in?
Right.
And I also think that your fourth suggestion here about critical discourse analysis as critical reading pedagogy, right, is that some of the things that you're talking about here, looking at policy for issues of hopelessness or futurity and how it's framing the reentry experience, these are potential things for adult literacy or adult basic ed classes themselves, right? These are things that
Yeah.
learners can be focusing on themselves. This isn't the type of reading that's only done by policy people or by researchers. This is the type of reading that all adults, should be doing and that teachers can help students working with.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
so we do have about 10 minutes. So if people have general thoughts about kind of some of the themes that Bill's brought up, questions that you'd like to ask Bill, things that you'd like to share, you can either do it as we've done previously in the session with you typing things out and I can read them, or I can unmute you and you can share your thoughts that way. It's funny in some of these online chat rooms, it says, so and so is typing. So you can tell when someone's typing, when if you're working with customer service or something. But in this case, it doesn't say that, you don't know that people are typing or not.
Oh.
But I
It's
presume they are. Here's a
um,
question from Adam, which is, what
yeah.
format should articles for the new journal follow?
Well, okay. So thank you, Adam. Generally APA format, but because um, these are not the practitioner side are not peer reviewed per se. They do go through two editors, and basically, and the website has some pretty good descriptions on it. So, in general, APA format for headings. Um, we do want to keep it to about 2,500 words. Some of the articles are have links. Like Adam and I have a colleague in common, Nicole Hammock, who did a digital story, and she's writing a paper about it, and there will be a link in the journal to her digital story. And so there can be some connections to multimedia, and there's more latitude on the practitioner side to include you know uh, so like links to photographs or to videos. It doesn't require them, but there's that. And because they are often written in the as a personal story, they can be written in the first person. Um, like here's my experience. We have a couple folks from the Richmond jail who teach at the Richmond jail, and they're co-authoring a paper with two of the people that are in the prison there who are writing the paper with them on that experience. So there's a lot of ways to go with it, and we're still figuring it out. So if you have ideas, and I know you do, you can run them by us as well. So thank you for that question.
Okay. Other thoughts or questions, things that people would like to share? It's always exciting to hear about a new journal getting off the ground.
It'll be more exciting if it gets off the
Yeah,
ground.
yeah, yeah.
But we're getting there. We're getting there. So.
Give people another couple minutes to think, maybe.
Yeah.
Bill, when you present these ideas about kind of reframing the way that we think about reentry to policy people, to state people, to people that are in a position to actually kind of like change the way things are done, what kind of response do you usually get from them?
Well, to be honest with you, I've never had that experience yet.
Okay.
Most we've done is we have, done a lot of work with persuading people inside the prison system
Okay.
to open their doors, and it is it has been just working with the people inside the system has been a fascinating journey. Um, for instance, the first year that we brought Hope House into a prison in Cumberland, Maryland, um, the warden was terrified and did everything he could to sabotage the program.
Hmm.
The second year, it went off without a hitch, and it was kind of tolerated. By about the fourth year, because it had this sort of like kind of civilizing effect, for lack of a better word, on the whole prison. Like the other prisoners were like cheering on these fathers, and like there was just this sense of goodwill that surrounded it. The warden realized this was really good for the orderly running of the prison, and now it's like Carol just won like a White House award for Hope House, and the director of the Bureau of Prisons award, and she has like ex-wardens who've retired from the Bureau are begging her to come and bring Hope House into they're now working in
Hmm.
private prisons or they're working in state. So our focus has been not at the policy level yet, Eric. It's a good, challenging question.
Okay.
I just we're not there yet.
Okay.
In fact, I might ask you at some point, not now, but for advice on how to approach that. That's new to me. It's an area that I've not done before. So.
Okay. Other thoughts or questions that people have?
Um, may I say one thing more about critical
Sure.
pedagogy? This is I almost took this bullet off because I I don't know. I just thought it would be like too much to sort of put into the same thing. But then listening to you like talking about it, I was like, yeah, that's good. That's damn right. But I mean, I wonder, for example, how do others feel, regardless of which area you're working in, whether it's literacy or vocational training or college readiness, transition, like, do you feel like there's a role to put critical issues in front of your students who are, studying in these sort of preformed programs where the pressure in the developmental ed programs at community colleges, they've only got like X number of shots to get through. Like, can you do dialogue? Can you raise, like Freire would say, these sort of like these critical reading of the world? Can you talk about like social justice issues in your classes? Are there repercussions for that in terms of either from the students themselves or from the administration? Or does the curriculum just force you to sort of avoid it? Or anyway, I'd love anyone's thoughts on this because this is a fascinating area to me and definitely one that's not easy.
I can share one experience I had working at the college level. For a number of years, I taught a developmental literacy course. So this is for freshmen coming in who had failed the placement test for the university system here in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to be enrolled, they had to be taking a literacy course. And so a lot of these students were, you know, reluctant readers, people who had a difficult time with reading. And so the last thing that I wanted to do was give them a Norton anthology or some sort of like, collection of excerpts from other texts because, that's going to hinder their reading comprehension. We don't listen to just one part of an opera and are asked to interpret it, right? So you need to get the whole thing. So I had all the students pick the books that they wanted to read, and one of the young women, young African American woman, was reading a book by Farai Chideya, who's an African American journalist and who also writes about politics and society. And so, in one of the chapters of the book that she was reading, there was a section about how African American students are overrepresented in developmental courses in college. So, as she and I are talking about it, I said, let's pause for a second and let's turn our heads and let's look at who's in this classroom, right? And so,
Mhm.
so the very thing that Faria today was talking about was the classroom that she and I were in, right? And so, and she was able to make that connection and really articulate what her experience was. So,
Yeah.
this notion that there's kind of like a critical period, or there's like a bare minimum that you have to have in terms of literacy to engage in these sorts of really
Mm.
analytical questions, I think is misleading. I mean,
Do you feel like that experience for her actually helped strengthen her basic literacy skills?
I think so. I
Yeah.
think so. And it certainly gave her confidence both as a reader, and it gave her confidence as a student to kind of analyze what was happening to herself.
Yeah.
Adam asked a question about thinking about repercussions from other faculty members.
Um,
Is that what you're thinking of, Bill, in terms of like if when you take some of these critical issues on in the classroom, that one of the
oh yeah.
repercussions that you have to worry about is other faculty responding negatively?
Uh, yeah. I mean, I've been accused of being like an inmate lover and stuff. I think that's possibly true. The culture of prisons is quite brutal. If any of you are interested, I have a friend, Randall Wright, who wrote a book called On the Borderlands, Going to Teach in Prisons. And again, it's not just for correctional educators, but it's all about sort of the culture of teaching in a prison. And it's just chapter after chapter of, of correctional educators' experiences. And it's really quite nicely done, I must say. And so I think, Adam, if I'm reading your question correctly, there are lots of hidden forces that keep us on the straight and narrow, without a doubt. And but I could also send a link to that book for anyone who's interested in that.
All right, it's just about the top of the hour, so we can hang around for a few more minutes. Babette wants you to repeat the author and the book title, Bill.
Okay, the author's name is Randall Wright, Wright. He's the editor, and the book is called On the Borderlands, Going to Teach in Prisons. And I'm sorry I don't have the publisher right there in front of me. But Babette, also, Eric, I don't think I have my email address on any of these slides.
Yeah.
Is there a way I could type it into the first slide?
What we can do is we can add it to the PDF when we send it out.
Okay, thank you. Please do that, because I'd really welcome any folks who want to follow up. It would be great.
Okay.
So, yeah. And I even have part of that book digitized, so if you want to get like read the introductory section of it and see if the book sounds good, I'd be happy to send that out to anybody who asks for it. So.
Okay. Well, I think, and Shannon was asking for a link for the book, so I think we can definitely put that in there too.
Okay.
So I would like to thank Bill for a very informative and I think productive hour of a webinar. Thanks for joining us and sharing your ideas and expertise with us. And I'd like to thank all of you for participating and sharing your ideas. One of the goals that we have for these NGL webinars is that they're not just 1 hour of somebody on the other end talking, right? And that they work best when we have some back and forth, even if it's just, via chatting, and me reading it. But I think it adds to it rather than someone kind of speaking for an hour. So I encourage you to register for the other webinars coming up, the other NGL webinars coming up. If you've got an idea for a webinar, let me know at nglmail@gmail.com, and we can think about getting you on and doing your own webinar. As I said, we'll send out a certificate of attendance, and we'll also send out the PDFs for the webinar itself. And Bill and I are going to discuss whether or not we're going to archive it, and then if we do, we'll send you the link for that, and it'll be up on YouTube. Okay.
Right.
So
okay, thank you again.
Any last minute questions, folks? All right. Thanks again, everyone. Bill, I'm going to grab the screen back from you.
Okay. And again, thank you, Eric, for the invitation and for everybody for your participation. Please write. So if you want to stay in touch, it'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.